I told my best friend I was proud of her, and she destroyed my life with lies so twisted that even her own coworkers turned against her when the truth came out. What started as a celebration dinner ended with me discovering that everything I thought I knew about our friendship was built on manipulation, fake trauma stories, and a web of deceit so elaborate that it took months to unravel. My name is Harper, I'm 25 years old, and I thought I was being the perfect friend. I had let my college roommate Delilah live in my apartment rent-free for over a year, helped her pay off her debts, and even threw her a celebration dinner when she finally got her life together. But that one phrase, "I'm so proud of you," triggered something in her that would reveal the most shocking betrayal I could never have imagined. It all started back in college when I met Delilah during my junior year at Ohio State University. She was 2 years older than me, having taken some time off between high school and college, and from the moment we became friends in our shared psychology class, I could tell she'd been through some really tough times. She would tell me heartbreaking stories about her abusive father who would fly into violent rages over the smallest things, her mother's abandonment when she was just 15, and how she'd been homeless for months before starting college, sleeping in bus stations and 24-hour diners. "I just don't know how I'm going to make it through finals," Delilah would say, tears streaming down her face as we sat in the campus library at 2 in the morning. "My dad kicked me out again last week after I asked him for help with tuition, and I've been sleeping in the 24-hour study room because I can't afford a hotel or even a motel room." She described nights spent hiding in her beat-up Honda Civic when campus security would do their rounds, eating nothing but stolen packets of crackers from the dining hall, and working 3 different jobs just to afford her textbooks and basic supplies. She showed me pictures on her phone of bruises she claimed were from her father's latest outburst, and stories about having to choose between buying food or gas money to get to work. My heart absolutely broke for her every single time. I'd grown up in this stable, loving home in suburban Columbus with parents who supported my education and never made me worry about money. My uncle had left me this beautiful 2-bedroom apartment near campus when he passed away from cancer, along with enough money to cover expenses for several years. I'd never experienced the kind of trauma and poverty that Delilah described in such vivid, heartbreaking detail, and I felt this overwhelming need to help her however I could. I started small at first. I'd buy her coffee when we studied together, share my meal plan swipes when she said she was too broke to eat, and let her borrow my textbooks when she couldn't afford her own. I'd invite her over for dinner when I knew she'd been surviving on vending machine snacks for days. She was always so grateful, sometimes crying with relief when I'd offer to help. "You don't understand what this means to me," she'd say, hugging me tightly after I'd buy her groceries or slip her some cash for gas. "Nobody's ever cared about me the way you do. You're literally saving my life." As our friendship deepened, the stories got more detailed and more heartbreaking. She told me about Christmas mornings when her father would destroy all her presents in a drunken rage, about having to drop out of high school for 6 months to work full-time when her mother disappeared without warning, about sleeping in homeless shelters where she was assaulted by other residents. She had an answer for everything, a detailed backstory that explained every aspect of her difficult life. After we graduated, I couldn't stand the thought of my friend struggling while I had this whole extra bedroom sitting empty and a trust fund that covered all my expenses. So I made what I thought was the most generous offer I could possibly make. "Hey, why don't you move in with me?" I suggested one afternoon as we grabbed coffee at our favorite campus cafe for the last time before graduation. "You can stay completely rent-free until you get back on your feet and pay off those student loans. I know how hard things have been for you, and I have plenty of space." The relief in her eyes was immediate and overwhelming. She started crying right there in the coffee shop, attracting stares from other customers. "Harper, that would literally save my life," she said through her tears. "I've been so scared about what was going to happen after graduation. I promise I won't be a burden, and I'll pay you back somehow when I'm more stable." I remember feeling this warm sense of purpose, like I was finally able to make a real difference in someone's life. Growing up privileged, I'd always felt guilty about having things so easy when other people suffered. Helping Delilah felt like my chance to use my advantages for something meaningful. And honestly, for the longest time, she wasn't a burden at all. We had this really wonderful living situation going that felt natural and comfortable. Delilah was neat, respectful, and we got along perfectly. She'd cook these elaborate dinners sometimes as a way to show her appreciation. I'd handle the groceries and utilities without complaint, and we'd spend evenings watching movies, talking about our days, or just enjoying each other's company. She had this way of making even ordinary moments feel special and meaningful. The apartment became this cozy sanctuary where we could both relax and be ourselves. Delilah would tell me about her new job at the marketing firm, her coworkers, her hopes for the future. I'd share my own career struggles as a freelance graphic designer, my dating disasters, my family drama. It felt like the kind of friendship you see in movies, supportive, genuine, and built on mutual respect, understanding, and shared experiences. She was also an incredible listener. When I was stressed about a difficult client or worried about my career direction, Delilah would sit with me for hours, offering thoughtful advice and emotional support. She remembered details about my life that even my family members forgot, and she had this way of making me feel heard and valued that I'd never experienced before. "You deserve so much better than this," she'd say when I'd complain about a client who was refusing to pay me for weeks of work. "You're talented and professional, and anyone would be lucky to work with you." Months went by, and I started noticing some really positive changes in Delilah's life. She'd been working at this marketing firm downtown, starting as a basic administrative assistant, but she was clearly ambitious and hardworking. One day she came home practically glowing with excitement, her whole face lit up in a way I'd rarely seen before. "I got promoted," she announced, bursting through the front door with this huge smile that made my heart swell with happiness for her. "They're making me a senior account coordinator, and it comes with a really substantial raise and actual benefits for the first time in my life." I was genuinely thrilled for her, probably more excited than she was. "That's absolutely amazing. You've been working so incredibly hard for this opportunity, staying late every night and taking on extra projects. You totally deserve this." We celebrated that night with takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant and a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. Watching her talk about her new responsibilities and her hopes for the future, I felt this deep sense of satisfaction knowing that I'd played a small part in helping her get to this point. Without having to worry about rent or basic expenses, she'd been able to focus entirely on excelling at work. Then came the financial breakthrough that I thought would change everything for the better. A few weeks later, Delilah came home with the biggest smile I'd ever seen on her face, practically bouncing with excitement as she kicked off her heels in the entryway. "I did it," she said, grabbing my hands and spinning me around in the living room. "I paid off my last student loan today. Harper, I'm completely debt-free for the first time in my adult life. Can you believe it?" I felt this overwhelming surge of happiness and pride for her that brought tears to my eyes. Watching someone you care about overcome their struggles and achieve their goals, it's honestly one of the most beautiful things you can witness as a friend. All those stories she'd told me about eating ramen noodles for weeks to make loan payments, about lying awake at night stressed about interest rates and minimum balances, all of that was finally behind her. "This calls for a real celebration," I said, hugging her tightly. "I'm so proud of how far you've come." She was working with a financial advisor now, someone from her company's employee assistance program, and she'd been diligently putting most of her new salary toward her debts. Seeing her take control of her finances after years of struggle was incredibly inspiring to watch. But the real celebration came a few weeks later when Delilah finally passed her driving test. She'd been trying for months, failing multiple times due to what she said was test anxiety stemming from her traumatic childhood experiences. Every failure had sent her into a spiral of self-doubt and depression, convinced that she was too damaged to ever be truly independent. "I can't believe I actually did it," she said, waving her temporary license in the air when she got home that day. "The instructor said I was one of the most improved drivers he'd ever tested. I feel like I can finally start living like a normal adult." I knew how important this milestone was for her independence and self-confidence. She'd talked about feeling trapped and dependent on others for transportation, how it reminded her of being controlled by her father. Getting her license represented freedom in a way that went far beyond just being able to drive. That's when I decided to organize something really special to honor all of her achievements. I reached out to our mutual friends from college, Iris, who was working as a nurse in Cleveland, Jasper, who'd moved to Chicago for law school, and Kieran, who was doing his residency at the local hospital, and planned this elegant dinner party at Marcello's, our favorite Italian restaurant downtown where we used to go for special occasions during college. I wanted to celebrate all of Delilah's achievements properly, the way she deserved after everything she'd been through and overcome. I spent days planning every detail, making reservations for the private dining room, coordinating everyone's schedules, choosing a menu that included all of her favorite dishes. I even had the restaurant prepare a special dessert with "Congratulations Delilah" written in chocolate. The night of the dinner was absolutely perfect in every way I could have hoped for. We were all dressed up. I wore the navy blue dress Delilah had helped me pick out for job interviews, and she looked stunning in this emerald green dress that brought out her eyes. The restaurant had decorated our private room with flowers, and the ambience was warm and intimate. We spent hours laughing, sharing college memories, and talking about our current lives and future plans. Iris told us hilarious stories from the emergency room, Jasper complained about his demanding professors, and Kieran shared gossip from the hospital. Delilah was absolutely radiant, clearly enjoying being the center of positive attention and surrounded by people who cared about her and wanted to celebrate her success. "Remember when we thought we'd never survive organic chemistry?" Kieran said, raising his wine glass. "And now look at us, Delilah's got this amazing career in marketing, Harper's building her design business, and we're all actually functioning adults." When dessert arrived, I stood up with this heartfelt card I'd spent hours writing and rewriting, wanting to capture exactly how proud I was of my friend's journey. "Before we finish up tonight, I wanted to say something," I began, feeling emotional as I looked at Delilah surrounded by all the people who cared about her. "Delilah, watching you overcome everything you've been through, seeing you work so hard and achieve all these incredible milestones, paying off your debt, getting promoted, passing your driving test, it's been absolutely inspiring to witness. You've shown incredible strength and resilience." I handed her the card, and inside was a heartfelt message I'd written about our friendship, along with $500 in cash toward her first car. I'd been saving money specifically for this moment, knowing how much independence meant to her. "I know you've been looking at used cars online every night," I continued, "and I wanted to help you take that next step toward complete independence. You've worked so hard for this moment." Delilah started crying immediately, and I thought they were happy tears. She hugged me tightly and thanked me over and over again, her voice thick with emotion. Our friends were all smiling, taking pictures with their phones, and the whole moment felt so genuine and beautiful and meaningful. "I can't believe you did all this for me," she said, wiping her eyes with the cloth napkin. "Nobody's ever thrown me a party like this before. I feel so loved and supported." But then I said the words that would change everything between us forever. "I'm just so proud of you, Delilah. You've come so far from where you started, and you should be incredibly proud of yourself too." The change in her demeanor was instant and terrifying to witness. Her face went completely cold, like someone had flipped a switch, and she pulled away from me like I'd physically hurt her or said something deeply offensive. "I hate it when you say that," she said, her voice sharp and bitter in a way I'd never heard before. "I hate it when you say you're proud of me. It's condescending and patronizing." The entire table went silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that private dining room. Our friends exchanged confused glances, and I felt this knot forming in my stomach as the celebratory atmosphere evaporated completely. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you," I said, genuinely confused and hurt by her reaction. "I was just trying to express how happy I am for your success and how much I admire your strength." "Well, don't," she snapped, standing up abruptly and grabbing her purse. "I don't need your approval or your condescending pride." But Delilah didn't respond to my apology or attempt to explain her reaction. She just gathered her things and left the restaurant without another word, leaving me sitting there humiliated and completely bewildered in front of our friends, with a half-eaten celebration cake and an atmosphere of confused tension. "What just happened?" Iris asked, voicing what we were all thinking. That seemed like such a normal, supportive thing to say. I tried to salvage the evening, but the mood was completely ruined. We finished dinner in awkward conversation, everyone clearly uncomfortable and confused about what had triggered such an extreme reaction. I paid the bill and apologized to our friends for the bizarre ending to what was supposed to be a celebration. The next few days at home were absolutely awful and uncomfortable. Delilah completely ignored me, acting like I didn't exist in my own apartment. She would walk past me without making eye contact, and when I tried to talk to her about what had happened at the restaurant, she'd just go to her room and slam the door hard enough to rattle the walls. I kept replaying that moment over and over in my mind, trying to understand what I could have possibly said wrong. "I'm proud of you" seemed like such a normal, supportive thing to say to a friend who had achieved important goals. I'd said similar things to her before without any negative reaction. But then something even worse started happening that made the silent treatment seem minor by comparison. Delilah's coworkers, people I'd never even met or spoken to, started sending me angry, hostile messages on social media platforms I didn't even know they had access to. "You're disgusting," one message read from someone named Marcus. "How dare you treat someone like that? You should be ashamed of yourself." Another message from a woman named Petra said, "Delilah told us what you did to her at that dinner. You're a manipulative, condescending person who gets off on making others feel small." A third message, this one from someone named Raphael, was even more direct. "We all know what kind of person you really are. Stop pretending to be her friend when you're clearly just using her for your own ego." I was completely devastated and confused by these messages. I had no idea what Delilah had told them about our dinner, but clearly she'd painted me as some kind of villain who had deliberately hurt or humiliated her. The messages kept coming throughout the week, each one more hostile than the last, and I started feeling anxious every time my phone buzzed with a notification. I tried reaching out to Delilah again, desperate to understand what had gone wrong and how I could fix it. I knocked on her bedroom door one evening when I knew she was home. "Delilah, please talk to me," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "I don't understand what happened at dinner or why your coworkers are sending me these messages. I was just trying to celebrate your achievements and show you how much I care about your success." She opened the door but wouldn't look me in the eye, speaking in this flat, emotionless tone that was somehow worse than her earlier anger. "I already told you, it was a misunderstanding," she said casually, like we were discussing the weather. "Everyone's overreacting to something that wasn't even a big deal. Just ignore the messages." But her coworkers kept sending me horrible, accusatory messages throughout the week, and I knew something was seriously wrong with her explanation. The messages were too detailed, too coordinated, too full of specific anger for this to be just a simple misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. I was losing sleep, feeling anxious and paranoid all the time, and questioning everything about our friendship and my own behavior. Had I really been condescending without realizing it? Was there some dynamic in our relationship that I was blind to? I started second-guessing every interaction we'd ever had. Finally, I decided to talk to Iris, one of our college friends who had been at the dinner and witnessed the entire exchange. She was just as confused as I was about what had happened and agreed that my comment had been completely normal and supportive. "I don't understand it either," Iris said when I called her, clearly frustrated. "What you said was completely normal and supportive. If anything, it was sweet and thoughtful. Let me talk to my friend Luna. She works at the same company as Delilah in the HR department. Maybe she can give us some insight into what's really going on here." A few days later, Luna showed up at my apartment unannounced, and she was absolutely furious. But I quickly realized that her anger wasn't directed at me, it was directed at Delilah, and she looked like she was ready to explode with rage. "I need to show you something," Luna said, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. "Delilah has been sending messages to everyone at work about you for weeks now, and I believed every word of it until I started really thinking about what she was saying and doing some investigating of my own." She showed me screenshots of messages that made my blood run cold and my hands shake as I read them. Delilah had been telling her coworkers that I was psychologically abusing her, that I kept her trapped in the apartment like a prisoner, that I forced her to pay exorbitant rent that consumed most of her salary, and that I regularly humiliated her in front of other people as a way to maintain control over her. "She said you make her ask permission to leave the apartment," Luna continued, scrolling through more messages. "She said you monitor her phone calls and emails. She said you threatened to call the police and have her arrested for trespassing if she ever tried to bring friends over to the apartment." I stared at the messages in complete shock, unable to process what I was reading. Every single thing was not just false, but the complete opposite of reality. Not only had I never charged Delilah rent, but I had been paying for all the utilities, groceries, and household expenses while she saved money to pay off her debts. "She said you canceled her 21st birthday party out of spite when she refused to clean your bathroom," Luna continued reading. "She said you make her sleep on an air mattress in the living room and that you steal money from her paychecks when she leaves them lying around." "Luna, none of this is true," I said, my voice barely above a whisper as the full scope of the lies became clear. "She's been living here completely rent-free for over a year. I've been helping her financially whenever she needed it. I actually paid for her 21st birthday party myself, the whole thing, including the venue, decorations, and all the food and drinks. It was this expensive themed party that she specifically requested." Luna's expression shifted from anger to confusion to horror as she realized what was happening, the full scope of the deception becoming clear to both of us. "Oh my God," she said, sinking into my couch. "She's been lying to all of us this entire time. We've been attacking you and supporting her based on complete fabrications. I feel sick to my stomach." Iris, who had been listening to this conversation with growing horror, looked absolutely disgusted and betrayed. "This is insane. Why would she make up something like this? What does she possibly gain from destroying your reputation with lies?" But it got worse as Luna continued reading through the messages we hadn't seen yet. As she scrolled through more of Delilah's communications with her coworkers, we discovered that she had also been claiming that I had somehow forced her to be grateful for my help, that I held her financial situation over her head as leverage, and that I regularly threatened to kick her out onto the street if she didn't comply with my unreasonable demands. "She even told us that you said you owned her because you were letting her live with you," Luna said, looking sick to her stomach as she read. "She made it sound like you were some kind of controlling abuser who got satisfaction from having power over someone in a vulnerable position. And apparently you force her to do all the cleaning and cooking while you sit around doing nothing, Luna added, scrolling through more messages. She said you haven't cleaned a bathroom or done a load of laundry in months because you make her do everything as payment for rent. I felt like I was going to throw up. This person I had trusted, cared for, and supported was systematically destroying my reputation with lies so elaborate, cruel, and calculated that I couldn't even comprehend the level of planning and manipulation required to maintain them all consistently. There's more, Luna said grimly. She's also been telling people that you sabotage her job opportunities because you don't want her to become independent and move out. She said you called her boss once to complain about her performance because you were jealous of her success. The lies were so numerous and so detailed that it would have taken considerable effort to keep track of them all. Delilah had created this entire alternate reality where I was a manipulative abuser and she was my helpless victim, and she'd been spreading this narrative to anyone who would listen. That evening, when Delilah came home from work, I was waiting for her in the living room with printed copies of all the messages Luna had shown me. My hands were shaking, and I felt like I might vomit from anxiety, but I knew this confrontation was unavoidable. We need to talk right now, I said, trying to keep my voice steady and controlled despite the rage and hurt I was feeling. Delilah looked at the papers in my hands, and for just a moment, I saw something like panic flash across her face before she composed herself and sat down casually on the opposite end of the couch, as if we were about to discuss dinner plans. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice perfectly calm as if she had no idea what was coming. "Your coworkers showed me the messages you've been sending about me," I said, holding up the papers with evidence of her lies. "Every single thing you've said is a lie, Delilah. I need you to explain to me why you would do this to someone who has done nothing but try to help you." She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her mind working, trying to figure out what explanation might work, what story might get her out of this situation. "It's not that simple," she finally said, her voice taking on a defensive tone. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under at work. Sometimes people ask questions, and things get out of hand before you realize what's happening. So you admit you've been lying about me to your coworkers?" She sighed deeply, like I was being unreasonable for asking her to account for her actions. Some of it was exaggerated for effect. But you have to understand, I was dealing with a lot of stress, and sometimes when people ask questions about your living situation, you just say things that make the story more interesting. "Exaggerated?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "You told them I make you sleep on an air mattress in the living room when you have your own bedroom. You told them I steal money from your paychecks when I've never touched your money. You told them I canceled your birthday party when I literally paid for the entire thing myself and spent weeks planning it." Delilah looked down at her hands, unable to meet my eyes. "I know it sounds bad when you put it like that, but people love drama. It makes them feel more involved in your life when there's conflict and struggle. It doesn't just sound bad, Delilah. It's completely false. These aren't exaggerations or embellishments, they're outright lies designed to make me look like an abuser while painting yourself as a victim." She was quiet for another long moment, and then she said something that made my blood run cold and confirmed my worst fears about her character. "I guess I got carried away with the story," she said with a shrug, as if she was talking about a novel she'd been writing rather than lies that had damaged real relationships. "Story?" I repeated, unable to believe what I was hearing. "This isn't a story, Delilah. This is my life, my reputation, my relationships with people. You've been systematically destroying me with lies, and you're talking about it like it's entertainment." Finally, under continued pressure and faced with undeniable evidence, she broke down and admitted the truth. Not only had she been lying about our current living situation and my treatment of her, but she confessed that most of the stories she'd told me about her traumatic past were also complete fabrications. "My dad was never abusive," she said, tears streaming down her face as the full scope of her deception came out. "My parents had an amicable divorce when I was 16, and my dad moved to Australia for a really good job opportunity with his company. I visit him every Christmas, and he sends me money for my birthday every year. I was never homeless. I never slept in my car or in bus stations. I never worked 3 jobs to survive. I made all of that up. I felt like the ground was disappearing beneath me, like everything I thought I knew about reality was crumbling. Why would you lie about something like that? Why would you make up stories about trauma and abuse?" "Because I wanted people to care about me," she said, her voice taking on this desperate, pleading tone. "I wanted sympathy and attention and for people to think I was special and strong for overcoming so much. And it worked. You let me live here rent-free, you helped me financially, you treated me like I was this amazing survivor who deserved special consideration. But I would have been your friend anyway," I said, completely bewildered by her logic. You didn't need to lie to me about anything. I would have helped you because I cared about you as a person. But would you have?" she asked, looking directly at me for the first time in this conversation. "Would you have let me live here rent-free if you thought I was just a regular person with regular problems? Would you have paid for my birthday party and given me money for a car if I didn't have this tragic backstory that made you feel sorry for me?" I realized in that moment that I would have. I would have helped her because she was my friend, not because of her sob story. But she had built our entire relationship on a foundation of lies and manipulation, calculating exactly what would generate the most sympathy and support. "So our entire friendship was based on lies?" I asked, feeling the full weight of the betrayal settling in. "Not entirely," she said quickly. "I do care about you. I do value our friendship. I just enhanced certain aspects of my background to make our connection stronger." "Enhanced?" I repeated. "You told me your father beat you. You told me your mother abandoned you. You told me you were homeless and hungry and desperate. Those aren't enhancements, Delilah. Those are complete fabrications designed to manipulate my emotions. I need you to move out," I said quietly, the words feeling surreal as they came out of my mouth. "I'm giving you 1 week to find somewhere else to live." She tried to apologize, tried to hug me, tried to convince me that she really did love me and that our friendship was real despite everything she'd admitted. "Please don't do this," she begged, reaching for my hands. "I know I messed up, but I can fix this. I'll tell everyone at work the truth about everything. I'll explain that I was going through a difficult time and said things that weren't accurate." But I couldn't trust a single word that came out of her mouth anymore. How could I believe anything she said when she just admitted to lying about fundamental aspects of her life and our relationship for years? "Please don't make me leave," she continued, tears streaming down her face. "You're the best friend I've ever had. I love you, and I love living here with you. I'll do anything to make this right." But the damage was already done. Not only had she lied about our current situation, but I now had to question every story she'd ever told me, every moment of vulnerability she'd shared, every time I'd comforted her or helped her through a supposed crisis. "I can't trust you anymore," I said simply. "I don't know who you really are or what parts of our friendship were genuine. I need you to leave." After she went to her room, I called her mother that night, something I probably should have done years ago but had never thought to do because I'd trusted Delilah's stories about her family situation. The conversation with Mrs. Patterson confirmed my worst fears and revealed even more lies than I'd already uncovered. "Delilah has always been a storyteller," her mother said sadly when I explained what had been happening. "She's been making up elaborate stories for attention since she was a little girl. We've tried to get her professional help multiple times, but she refuses to admit there's a problem with her behavior. So none of the stories about abuse or homelessness or financial struggles were true." "None of them," her mother confirmed. "Her father and I divorced amicably when she was 16 because we'd grown apart, but it was completely peaceful. He moved to Australia for a really good job opportunity with an international company, and Delilah visits him every Christmas and for part of the summer. She's never been homeless, never been abused, never been abandoned by either of us. We've always supported her financially and emotionally. She told me that her father was violent and that you disappeared when she was 15. Mrs. Patterson sighed deeply. "We've heard variations of that story before from her friends and teachers over the years. She seems to enjoy creating these dramatic narratives about her life that make people feel sorry for her. We've tried talking to her about it, but she always denies it or claims people misunderstood what she said." Learning this information was devastating but also clarifying. It meant that everything I thought I knew about Delilah's background, everything that had motivated me to help her, was completely false. Our entire friendship had been built on manipulation from the very beginning. After Delilah moved out the following week, I started therapy to deal with the trauma of discovering that one of my closest friendships had been built entirely on lies and emotional manipulation. My therapist, Dr. Rodriguez, helped me understand that I had been the victim of a very sophisticated form of psychological abuse. "What you experienced is called pathological lying combined with manipulation," Dr. Rodriguez explained during one of our sessions. "Some people are capable of creating and maintaining elaborate false narratives specifically designed to elicit sympathy, support, and resources from others." The therapy sessions helped me realize that I wasn't crazy or overly suspicious for feeling confused and betrayed. What Delilah had done was calculated and deliberate, not just casual dishonesty or exaggeration. Luna later told me more details about how the situation had unfolded at Delilah's workplace, and the information was both validating and disturbing. She initially started telling these lies at work to get sympathy from this guy Marcus who works in our IT department, Luna explained. "He has a history of helping people who have experienced trauma. He volunteers at a domestic violence shelter and is really passionate about supporting survivors. Delilah apparently researched his background and crafted her story specifically to appeal to his desire to help. When that didn't work out the way she hoped romantically, Luna continued, she kept elaborating on the stories because people were giving her attention and sympathy. It became this whole dramatic narrative that she couldn't back out of without admitting she'd been lying. The most disturbing part was realizing how calculated and researched it all was. Delilah had studied what would get her the most sympathy and support, then crafted her lies accordingly. She had researched common signs of abuse and trauma, then woven them into convincing stories that would maximize people's desire to help her. She even looked up statistics about homelessness and domestic violence to make her stories more believable, Luna told me. She had details about shelters and social services that she'd never actually used but had researched online. Even after she left my apartment, I kept discovering new lies and inconsistencies in stories she'd told over the years. Friends from college would mention things she had told them about me or about her own life that were completely false. She had been spreading different versions of stories to different people, carefully keeping track of who believed what. Iris called me a few weeks after Delilah moved out with more disturbing information. I was talking to Kieran about everything that happened, Iris said, and he reminded me of something strange from college. Remember when Delilah said her grandmother died during finals week junior year, and we all helped her with her assignments and brought her food? Of course, I said. She was devastated. We spent hours comforting her. Well, Kieran saw her posting pictures on social media that same week of her and her grandmother at some family event. Her grandmother is apparently alive and well and living in Florida. The lies extended back further than I'd realized. How many other tragic events in her life had been completely fabricated? How many times had I comforted her over losses and traumas that never actually happened? She also told me she couldn't afford her textbooks one semester, so I bought them for her, Iris continued. But I just remembered she had a really expensive new laptop that same month that she said her dad had bought her for her birthday. If her dad was abusive and had cut her off financially, how was he buying her expensive electronics? The more we examined her stories, the more inconsistencies we found. She had been maintaining multiple contradictory narratives for years, and none of us had questioned them because we trusted her and wanted to be supportive friends. The experience taught me some hard lessons about manipulation and the signs I should have recognized earlier. Delilah's stories were always perfectly calibrated to generate maximum sympathy without being so extreme that they seemed unbelievable. She never had documentation or proof of her supposed struggles, always having convenient excuses for why she couldn't provide evidence. She was also incredibly skilled at deflecting questions that might expose inconsistencies in her stories. I should have realized something was wrong when she always had an excuse for why she couldn't prove things, I told Dr. Rodriguez during therapy. No photos from her supposed homeless period, no medical records from abuse, no documentation of her financial struggles. She always had an explanation for why evidence didn't exist. Dr. Rodriguez nodded. Pathological liars are often very skilled at creating plausible explanations for gaps in their stories. They study how people react and adjust their narratives accordingly. But what hurt the most wasn't just the lies themselves, it was realizing how calculated it all was. Delilah had studied my personality, my values, my background, and crafted her story specifically to appeal to my desire to help people. She knew that my privileged upbringing made me feel guilty, and she exploited that guilt to manipulate me into providing financial support and housing. She told me once that she wished she could have grown up in a stable home like mine, I remembered during another therapy session. She said she envied how close I was with my parents. I felt so guilty about having advantages she didn't that I tried to compensate by giving her everything I could. That's a classic manipulation technique, Dr. Rodriguez explained. She was making you feel responsible for inequalities that weren't your fault, then positioning herself as someone you could help to alleviate that guilt. Luna continued to keep me updated on the fallout at Delilah's workplace, and the information was both satisfying and disturbing. When the truth about her lies came out, her coworkers felt betrayed and manipulated, just like I did. Marcus was devastated, Luna told me during one of our coffee meetings. He'd been advocating for her to get additional support through our employee assistance program. He'd even offered to help her find resources for trauma counseling. When he found out it was all lies, he felt like she'd made a mockery of real trauma survivors. The Human Resources Department had to get involved because Delilah's lies had created a hostile work environment. Her coworkers had been treating me badly based on false information, and some of them had even considered reporting me to authorities for abuse. We almost called Adult Protective Services about you, Luna admitted sheepishly. Delilah's stories were so detailed and convincing that we really believed you were keeping her in an abusive situation. I'm so sorry for how we treated you. But the consequences for Delilah at work were severe. While they couldn't fire her for lying about her personal life, her relationships with her coworkers were permanently damaged. People stopped trusting her, stopped including her in social activities, and began questioning everything she said. She tried to apologize and claim it was all a misunderstanding, Luna said. But how do you misunderstand your own life history? How do you accidentally lie about being abused and homeless? Delilah eventually left that job, though I don't know if she quit or was encouraged to leave. Luna heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to a different city, presumably to start fresh somewhere that people didn't know about her lies. The hardest part of recovery was learning to trust my own judgment again. Delilah had been so convincing, so consistent in her lies, that I started questioning my ability to recognize deception in other people. It's normal to feel paranoid and suspicious after an experience like this, Dr. Rodriguez assured me. You were victimized by someone who was very skilled at manipulation. The fact that you believed her doesn't make you naive or gullible, it makes you a trusting person who was taken advantage of. I also had to work through feelings of guilt about all the real trauma survivors who might not be believed because of people like Delilah. How many legitimate victims of abuse and poverty are dismissed because others have lied about similar experiences? That's not your responsibility, Dr. Rodriguez reminded me. Delilah's actions reflect on her character, not on the legitimacy of real trauma survivors. You can't control how other people react to her lies. About 6 months after Delilah moved out, I ran into Jasper at a coffee shop near campus. He'd heard about everything that had happened and wanted to check on how I was doing. I keep thinking about all those times in college when we helped her through supposed crises, he said, shaking his head. Remember when she said she couldn't afford her medication and we all pitched in to help her pay for it? I did remember. We'd collected over $200 to help her buy what she said was essential medication for anxiety and depression related to her trauma. Now I wondered if she'd even been prescribed medication or if that was just another way to get money from sympathetic friends. The worst part is wondering what was real, Jasper continued. Were any of her emotions genuine? Did she actually care about us as friends, or were we just sources of sympathy and support? That was the question that haunted me the most. In quiet moments, I'd remember times when Delilah seemed genuinely happy or grateful or caring, and I'd wonder if those moments were real or just part of her performance. Some of it might have been genuine, Dr. Rodriguez suggested. People who engage in this kind of manipulation aren't necessarily incapable of real emotions or relationships. But they've learned to use emotions as tools to get what they want. I eventually decided to redecorate the apartment completely, wanting to erase all traces of Delilah's presence. I painted the walls, bought new furniture, and turned her former bedroom into a home office for my graphic design business. It felt symbolic, creating something new and positive from a space that had been contaminated by lies and manipulation. The process of rebuilding my life and relationships took almost a year. I had to learn to trust people again while also being more observant of red flags and inconsistencies. I developed better boundaries and became more comfortable asking for documentation or proof when people told me dramatic stories about their lives. It's not that you should become cynical or suspicious of everyone, Dr. Rodriguez explained. But you can be compassionate while also being smart about protecting yourself from manipulation. I also had to work through the financial impact of Delilah's deception. While I'd offered to let her live rent-free, I calculated that I'd spent thousands of dollars over the years helping her with various supposed emergencies and needs. Money I'd given her for groceries when she claimed to be broke, gift cards I'd bought when she said she couldn't afford basic necessities, the birthday party I'd paid for, and countless other expenses. I'm not angry about the money, I told Dr. Rodriguez. I'm angry about the lies. If she'd been honest about her situation and asked for help, I might have still been willing to assist a friend. But she built our entire relationship on deception. One of the most disturbing realizations was understanding how Delilah had used my own values against me. She knew I cared about social justice, helping disadvantaged people, and using my privilege for good. She crafted her lies specifically to appeal to those values, making me feel like supporting her was a moral imperative rather than just helping a friend. That's why her manipulation was so effective, Dr. Rodriguez observed. She didn't just lie to get sympathy, she studied your character and told you exactly what you needed to hear to feel obligated to help her. About 8 months after everything happened, I received a message from Delilah on social media. She'd apparently moved to Portland and was working at another marketing firm. The message was long and rambling, mixing apologies with excuses and attempts to minimize what she'd done. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry for that, the message read. I was going through a really difficult time in my life and made some poor choices. I hope you can understand that I never meant to cause you pain. I really did value our friendship, even if I didn't always handle things perfectly. I showed the message to Dr. Rodriguez, who pointed out all the manipulation tactics Delilah was still using even in her supposed apology. She's minimizing her actions by calling them poor choices and claiming she was going through a difficult time, Dr. Rodriguez noted. She's also not taking full responsibility. She's saying she didn't always handle things perfectly rather than admitting she systematically lied and manipulated you for years. I decided not to respond to the message. Delilah had proven that she couldn't be trusted to tell the truth, and I saw no benefit in reopening communication with someone who had caused so much damage to my life and relationships. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, Dr. Rodriguez reminded me. You can let go of anger and resentment for your own peace of mind without having to rebuild a relationship with someone who has shown they can't be trusted. The experience also changed how I approach helping others. I'm still generous and compassionate, but I'm more careful about verifying people's stories and setting appropriate boundaries. I've learned that truly helping someone sometimes means saying no to enable their independence rather than creating dependency. You can be kind and supportive without being naive, Dr. Rodriguez said. Healthy relationships are built on honesty and mutual respect, not on one person rescuing another. I also started volunteering with a local organization that helps people experiencing homelessness and domestic violence. Working with legitimate trauma survivors helped me process my anger about Delilah's fake stories and reminded me that most people who ask for help are genuinely in need. Don't let one person's deception make you cynical about everyone else's struggles, the volunteer coordinator told me when I explained my motivation for volunteering. The vast majority of people who seek help are telling the truth about their situations. It's been over a year now since Delilah moved out, and I'm in a much better place emotionally and psychologically. I've learned to trust my instincts again, and I've built new friendships based on honesty and mutual respect. The experience was traumatic, but it also taught me valuable lessons about manipulation, boundaries, and the importance of verifying information before making major decisions. Looking back, I realized there were red flags I ignored because I wanted to be a good friend and because Delilah was so skilled at explaining away inconsistencies. Her stories were always dramatic but not unbelievable, detailed but impossible to verify, and perfectly calibrated to generate sympathy without raising suspicions. Manipulation works because manipulators study their targets and tell them exactly what they want to hear, Dr. Rodriguez explained. They're skilled at identifying people's vulnerabilities and exploiting them. But I've also learned that being victimized by manipulation doesn't make me weak or stupid. It makes me human. Delilah spent years perfecting her lies and studying how to exploit people's compassion. The fact that her manipulation work doesn't reflect poorly on my character, it reflects on hers. I still live in the same apartment, but it feels completely different now. It's truly my space, decorated according to my preferences, filled with genuine relationships and honest experiences. I've learned to value authenticity over drama, truth over sympathy, and real connections over manipulative ones. The question I posed in my original post, "Am I wrong for telling my friend I was proud of her?" seems almost laughable now. The problem was never what I said. The problem was that Delilah had built our entire relationship on lies and couldn't handle genuine expressions of support because they reminded her of how false her persona was. You weren't wrong for expressing pride in what you thought were her achievements, Dr. Rodriguez confirmed. You were responding appropriately to what you believed was her growth and success. The fact that it was all based on lies doesn't make your response inappropriate. I've shared my story with other people who have experienced similar manipulation, and I've learned that this kind of elaborate deception is more common than I realized. There are people who build entire relationships, careers, and social networks on fabricated stories designed to generate sympathy and support. The important thing is that you recognize the manipulation when evidence was presented to you, one support group member told me. Some people refuse to see the truth even when it's right in front of them. So to answer my original question, no, I wasn't wrong for telling my friend I was proud of her. I was wrong for believing her lies for so long, but that's a different issue entirely. What I've learned is that real friendship is built on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being, not on fabricated trauma designed to manipulate emotions and extract resources. The experience was devastating, but it ultimately made me stronger, wiser, and better able to recognize genuine relationships. I'm grateful for the support of my real friends, my therapist, and everyone who helped me see the truth about Delilah's manipulation. Sometimes the most painful experiences teach us the most valuable lessons about ourselves and about the kind of people we want in our lives.